Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Reverend Sheri Pallas, author of We Have Ruined God. What kind of started you on the path to creating this book?
So my grandson's mother contacted me because she wanted to have my grandson christened before his first birthday. And because I was a Protestant and evangelical, I advised her that we did dedications as opposed to christenings. I could help her with the dedication, but because I'm not Catholic, I couldn't help with the christening. So after I explained it to her, she was game, and I said I would contact the church and get things going because they were in Virginia in the military. So the next day, I contacted the church and was given a kind of an inquisition about the status of my son and the baby's mama and the grandchild. They said that because he was conceived in sin and they were not married at that point, that they would not do a prayer over my grandson, which enraged me. So I wrote my first and only complaint letter to the church, and it kind of didn't stop from there.
Well, we've created this Christianity that's all about do you drink, do you smoke, do you cuss, do you have tattoos? In some churches, are you a guy with long hair or
Yeah.
piercings? Like, like we've created this thing, and going through your book, you kind of cut through all the myths of Christianity. You kind of did your research, and you found out kind of all the little myths that we've created in our theologies. We've created a God that you have to offer worship and humor and cultivate and please and seek forgiveness from, and ultimately hope to attain, a reward from in the form of like heaven. And you really kind of turn everything upside down in your book.
Yeah, well, it was a journey for me, right? Because I mean, my mother had disowned me throughout most of my life. And she was, I was told that I was living in sin and I was taking my grandson with me. In fact, I was just reviewing the audio book, and there is a part in there where I mimic her when she was screaming, "You're going to hell and you're taking my grandson with me." And I was like, holy crap, I sound just like her. I really got that in the voice on the audiobook. So yeah, I needed to find out if she was right. I needed to figure out if this God was really the jerk. I'm trying to be PC here. That is portrayed and was portrayed in my church so often, and I found that it was just the opposite.
Yeah, and you know, I was the Christian education director at a church, and when I went to Sunday school class, all the 13-year-old kids and stuff, they're like, "Oh yeah, we already know this." They spent their whole life in church, and they thought like they know everything in the Bible, and like, you know, but we're all kind of like that. Like at least I know I was at one point. Like you think you know all the basics and everything, and then you find out that if you do your research, you find out a lot of what you thought was not true. In my church, they actually had us learn this thing is almost like what you would hand somebody to a tract, and
Mm-hmm.
and they went by faith, and you were telling people you'd go door to door, and you'd tell people like, this is how you get to heaven or whatever. Like, and it was F is for forgiveness. Everybody needs God's forgiveness. A is for available. It's available, but it's not automatic. It's impossible to get to heaven on your own. T's for turn from sin and self to Jesus
Wow.
Christ. And H is for heaven. That's where you'll be forever with God.
Wow. It's a click.
Do what?
It's a click. It's like a high school click.
Mm-hmm.
That if you know the right stuff, and that's just so contradictory to Jesus dying on the cross for our sins and saying that we have an unconditional love from God. I it's just astonishing to me that most of the church has become what the Pharisees preached as opposed to what Jesus did. And so there's a whole level of hypocrisy there, and that hypocrisy causes shame, division, exclusion, supremacy. It's really consequential when people are affected so deeply by their religion and their faith, and then told that they're just a piece of crap because they were born.
um, in that tract, it doesn't mention anything about like following Jesus or anything. Well, it says turn from sin and self to Jesus.
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
you don't have to you don't have to be nice. You don't have to love your neighbor. It's really, I mean, and that was one of the things that really got me on my journey was, I understood that there was this fight between actions and faith and stuff like that, but I didn't really comprehend the enormity of the situation as far as I say in my book, having faith alone enables you to be an asshole all week. And working off of deeds kind of forces you to be the good person, kind of forces you to say, okay, I'm going to follow Jesus. But we focus too much on worship and accepting and all of these rituals as opposed to just being kind and compassionate to everyone around you.
which if you look in the Bible, Jesus will never say like, say this prayer and do.
Right. Well, and I talk in the book how he said, pray like this, and it's the Lord's Prayer. And that doesn't say, it says forgive our sins, but the sins back then was missing the mark. It wasn't like we now construe them. I even talk in the book about how potatoes were a sin for 200 years and how almost 200,000 people were killed because of it. It's not good theology. It doesn't help anybody. And if anything, it hurts people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I forgot all about that part.
Tomatoes too.
Yeah, tomatoes. I think you said that basically anything enjoyable in the book. You said anything enjoyable that we find enjoyable, the church is at some point deemed like a sin.
Right. Except for sugar. Except for sugar, which was responsible for the mass deportations and enslavement of humans across the planet.
Of course.
Yeah. Agendas.
So if you start asking these types of questions, people start to view you as an atheist or an agnostic or a subverter of the social order or something. Like, did you get, what kind of pushback have you gotten from this book so far?
Ironically, not much, because the argument really boils down to, is love the right way, right? So I have gotten love is for foo-foos, love is weak. And then I just challenge them to actually live a loving life and try and do so. I use the example on a regular basis because I deal with road rage and I drive a lot. So when I am ready to just curse someone out or scream or something like that, I regularly check myself. Unfortunately, usually post the event. But acting in love is really challenging. And in order to do so, it's not easy. And I think that's why the church kind of stepped aside with it, because it's not easy. It's accountable. It's actually doing something as opposed to just believing something.
And that's a common theme of your book, love versus fear. Is it coming from a place of love, or are we kind of trying to force somebody through fear and intimidation?
I really lived my life like this because, as I say in the book, I was doomed. If the Christians are right, and I checked every mark. But I also couldn't believe that really good people I knew were also going to hell. And that's not a loving God. It's not a forgiving God. And a switch occurred in me when I realized that me, as a mere mortal, completely flawed, doomed for hell, would never treat my child the way that this God supposedly treats his children. So there were different things that sort of was like, this can't be right. This can't be right. And the person that Christianity, or evangelicalism more so, has portrayed is someone that I try to avoid. It's not someone who I want to be around by or anything. An unforgiving, judgmental snob. I just, that's not something worthy of my worship. When you have to go door to door and try and say, you're going to hell, when you have to try and recruit, that is the definition of predatory. In sales, it's diminished to, we got to go out and get that. But we really are, preying on people, saying, and that's PREY as opposed to AY, and saying, you're going to hell, you're damaged, you better repent and do this, as opposed to actually doing something nice for them, doing something good for them, because beliefs should never separate us. It should be something that we can agree on. But when hell is the ultimate punishment and our judgment is the ultimate source of that, it leads to so much damage.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna go through some of the some of the things in the book that I found interesting. God is pro-death.
Yeah.
Stars, planets, galaxies, plants, animals, and people. None of them get out alive. You said
Nothing. Nothing. I mean, and the first time, when I first started talking about this, people were like, but I also say that when Paul said the wages of sin are death, that was one of the biggest lies that we've ever been told, because everything dies. I lost my dog Bailey, that was the love of my life, a year ago, and I cannot tell you that animal sinned. So in the fact that everything dies means that sin cannot cause death. And believing sin causes death is why we get the trauma of, oh my God, after they die, are they in hell? Are they burning? Was their soul clean? Did they repent? All of these really unnatural and unneeded speculations, all because of this fear. God, if there is a God, he constructed everything to die. So yeah, God is pro-death.
And and what you said, it's embedded into your mind from from the beginning, really.
Yeah, totally. It's like, oh my God, he must have sinned. What did you do? When I got cancer, one of the first questions I asked was, what did I do wrong? Was my path wrong? Was something going on? I never asked that when my dog he had liver failure. I didn't look at him and go, where did you go wrong? It's just part of life. It's something that everything that we know will experience. Not necessarily in our lifetimes, like the sun, but yeah, it's just part of life.
That quote, rage, rage, rage against the dying of the light, and all this stuff. We've made death this really scary thing, when really it doesn't need to be. It doesn't. It's just kind of restarting, refreshing.
It's uniquely Western. And because the Eastern celebrates death, and I mean, it's, as I state in the book, it will always be a huge loss for us. It will always be a hole in our hearts, but it's because we miss them. It's not because they did something wrong. They just are gone. And when we try to make it all about our pain or their leaving, then it adds more shame to it. It demonizes it, when death really could be a beautiful thing if we got over our own suffering, which again is nearly impossible. I get that. Totally get that. But the person, I mean, think about it. Life is suffering. Life is pain. And if in fact we are energy, as the scientists say, energy does not dissolve or disintegrate. It just continues. So some people believe it continues to heaven. Other people believe it continues in other life forms. And even some people believe that we just become worm food, and that's part of our place. But regardless of those beliefs, if we don't know, and none of us know, then why would that cause division? I mean, we can talk about, I want to be a beluga whale or a dolphin or something like that, to be in awe of it, but not shamed or afraid or feeling like something is wrong because we're dead.
Yeah, and you explore a lot of the different ideas of hell, which I found interesting. I didn't know that there was some religions that had cold.
I know, right?
Cold,
That's my hell. My hell is below 70 degrees. I've been saying that since I was a child. When I found it, I was like, I told ya.
One of the ideas I've always found interesting is past lives, and you talked about how everything's kind of reborn or dies and is reborn. So it's not crazy to think that maybe we would be also.
Right. I mean, we always use the caterpillar to the butterfly. without really comprehending that the caterpillar must completely dissolve into a goo. Its form is not even recognizable. And Jesus was able to do it supposedly, but we totally say, oh, that's impossible because we're superior. And I don't believe we are.
And I used to read these books by Sylvia Browne, the psychic.
Oh, yes.
And she would talk about past lives and stuff, and she would talk about how if you have like a birthmark now, then that would be like some kind of unresolved trauma from a past life.
Yeah.
And I have 2 in the back of my head, and they're in the shape of like bullet holes. So I always thought that was kind of interesting.
I don't know. Are you familiar with Mike Dooley's work, which is Messages from the Universe?
No.
He did a past life regression seminar earlier this year, and so I joined in on it to see. And to make a really long story short, I was killed because I was shot in the eye, and I have a giant red dot in my eye. So that was kind of cool. I was like, that's why it's there. So yeah, it was kind of cool. But I mean, we say in the Bible, if there wasn't for reincarnation, Jesus would not have been the Messiah. According to Hebrew text, Elijah had to return to signify the Messiah. So Jesus actually says that John the Baptist is Elijah reincarnated, signaling that Jesus was the Messiah. Had they not believed in reincarnation, that would not have been valid. It would have not made any sense. So it's literally in the red text there of Jesus saying that, because John the Baptist is Elijah, it signifies me, nullifies any disbelief in reincarnation or nullifies Jesus as the Messiah. So, reincarnation was in the Hebrew text and early Christianity for about the first 500 years. But because of the similarities with Eastern religions and their reincarnation stuff, they had to cut it up and go, nope, we can't do that anymore. Even though reincarnation justified Jesus as the Messiah. It's kind of crazy, huh?
Yeah. like for my talk with Mark Sandlin, I was looking into a lot of the things where they would get groups together and they would discuss like what should be in and what should be out and all that stuff. And like there was some crazy emperor, I think you mentioned him in your book, maybe Augustine. Yeah, Constantine. That's it.
Yeah.
And these groups are crazy because it's as if today we called a church council together to make this decision, and we included like politicians in on it, and like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz are sitting in on the church meeting to decide what like we believe.
Right. Well, and the crazy thing about it is it was to form some type of union, right? To have a collection of texts to make sure that a general message was going out. But they couldn't even agree on how many people were there. There was 4 different record keepers of the people that were there, and all of them had different numbers by like hundreds. So, the thing about religion is that every religion is powerful because it had some type of follower from a government. Paul was a Pharisee, Constantine was a Roman emperor, even Augustine had political clout. But throughout the religions, from early Eastern religions to even what we see today, there was some type of political force behind them, which is how they gained their notoriety, and that's how they got their breadth across the planet. Knowing that, it's really easy to go, oh, okay, so that's why agendas were put in. That's why these things were changed, because they didn't work with the power structure. And when you have a power structure, it defeats all of the love and compassion and all of that, which is exactly what Jesus said.
I read the Sylvia Browne books, and she would talk about how like when you go to heaven, you see your life and you learn, you get whatever lessons you're supposed to get from it. And then at some point, whenever you want to, you can decide to come back, and you kind of decide where you're going to be and like, what you're going to be and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of like that versus, quantum leap style, where you're just kind of like
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw that show, but like where you're just kind of like in a body now, like uh-oh.
Well, I mean, I would have to think that there would be some type of planning, right? Because I think that our souls are here for a reason, and that reason is to become more loving, to become more aware. Um, MAGA would hate me for saying this, but to become more woke per se. And when you do those types of things, you have lessons to learn. And I've seen that across a lot of the people, my loved ones leaving. It's like their lessons were learned and then they passed away. It's seen throughout hospice too. So I think that we're really here to learn and to become better souls per se, for lack of a better word. And if we don't do that, or if we cut it short through suicide or something like that, hell doesn't doom us. Another lifetime might. I don't want to repeat this life. I don't want to come back. I really hope that this book of life that we are supposedly presented with, in the afterlife, is a book of what do you want to do next, of all of the life on the planet. And then your karma, your consequences from this life are impacted on that. It's surprisingly over 50% of the planet believes in some form of reincarnation. So it's not some crazy thing like, Sylvia Brown was on Oprah all the time and Phil Donahue. She was a lunatic. It's not that, especially with near-death experiences, which I get into the book, it's not that weird anymore. It's more like, okay, this is probably something that happens. One of the really cool things, since we're on the subject, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is a process, a guide to help people cross over in the afterlife. And it was written 12, 15, 1800 years ago. I'd have to check my notes. A long time ago, ancient. And they talk about moving someone into the light. The stories and how the book goes, while very disturbing for an American who has been taught to shun death, it mimics what people are reporting with near-death experiences. Atheists, believers, all of that stuff. Hundreds of, or over 1,000 years ago, they knew about going into the light. They knew about the soul transfer. So it's kind of cool. It's not new age in any way, shape, or form. If anything, it's very ancient. When you come back, you want to be a human again?
Not a white guy.
Right?
Definitely not a white guy. I know that. Other than that, I'm open.
Yeah, in the book, I asked my mom if she got to heaven, and she thought I was crazy, but she said her dog.
Yeah.
And that pissed me off so bad. It was like I was hoping for a butterfly or something, But I kind of think that Bailey was her. If it's possible, she came back to love me through my dog Bailey, where she never could on this earth.
But she said she didn't want to be your dog, though.
I know, she can't control that, though, right? She's gone. She doesn't have a dog. It's the way it is. She was a control freak, so I can imagine.
But that would also explain too why we're not just a configuration of our parents. You can be like totally different than your parents, even though they raised you and they teach you and all that kind of stuff. Thank God.
Right.
You had your paranoid issues, and I had mine on my dad's side. And actually, our dads sound very, very similar.
Really? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, that first section is really, in fact, I'm going to be doing an update on the book soon because I need to add a trigger warning there. Some of the people in my field who are now helping others get through things, life coaches, authors, all of that, are getting really triggered. That was not something that I expected. I expected it to be tough. It was tough. But I'm going to put a warning at the beginning of the book that, technically you can skip over that if it's too much. Because I guess it is.
All our current beliefs about Christian and Islamic hell are based on the Bible, not the Bible, but dogmatic adaptations driven by imagination and creativity.
Yeah.
So like poems and
Dante.
stories. Dante.
Dante was a really big one. I mean, there's always been type of some demonization, but because, well, not always. Judaism didn't fear death, and Christianity is supposed to be based on Judaism. But that also adds to the oh my gosh, Jesus rising from the dead. So there was that conflict, and only he could beat death because death is that bad. So you have all of these really negative things in it, and again, there shouldn't be. It should be your time is up. Everybody dies. I said that to my girlfriend when her father died ignorantly. I didn't understand at that point. She's never forgiven me, but it's true. It's literally true. I mean, nothing gets out of here alive. Nothing.
Why do you think people have it has to be so black and white? Like, oh, you were good, you're going to the good place. You were bad, you're going to the bad place.
I've come to learn that some people just think that way. They can't see the grays in between. They can't see the variances, the nuances, whether it be lazy thinking and they just don't want to explore that, or a lack of ability. So many people congregate to religion, unfortunately, who have that black and white thinking. So when you make God black and white, I think you miss all of the beauty, and you really miss all of the wonder that is in this planet, turning an eclipse into a judgment from God, a rainbow as a promise. All of these things just feed this negativity. And I think that the way that we view God often, is an implication of the way that we view everything. If you're angry and everything does have to be a black and white issue, then that's who your God's going to be. My point, do better. Do better. Find a better God.
It's eclipse, not apocalypse.
Exactly. I remember seeing a red sky as a kid, and I got all of the kids in the neighborhood together, and we were praying, and my panic and my indoctrination spread like wildfire to everyone I knew because of that fear. I mean, I was like 7 and terrified. Went from playing kickball in the courts to crying, going, "Oh my God is coming back, and you all are going to hell." Start saying the sinner prayer right now. That's never going to win people in any length of time. You might have the flight or fight thing going on, but long term, people are going to call BS. It just doesn't happen. And the best thing that ever happened to me was one of my coworkers said, "I want you to spend a day cross-checking yourself." And I found an article from an Australian guy who said, "The only thing I can guarantee you is that Jesus is not going to return today, just like the 2,000 years." And I was like, how dare he say that? It could happen at any point. But it's true. It's true. Jesus said that the disciples would not pass away, again, leading into reincarnation theories. But, there's a lot of inconsistencies there that are used to control, shame, exclude, as opposed to bring people together.
First time I heard about God and all this stuff, she took me to the side at my grandparents' house. I remember because they hadn't took us to church because they didn't want me crying in it or whatever when I was a baby, and then they just never got back into the habit of it. So I was 8 years old, and she's gonna take us to church, and she's like, "Okay, so God exists. There's God, and then there's this really evil thing that wants to destroy us all, but God's protecting us against him, and you just have to I had never heard anything about God or any of this before, and it was like all this stuff,
like the X-Men,
your whole reality has now changed.
Yeah.
But
especially as children, that's really when the damage gets done.
Well, and they would I'd have to go to this little Southern Baptist, hellfire and brimstone church, and the preacher would be like, "You're going to hell if you don't want it." And his face is turning red, and he's throwing off his jacket, and he's running, and women are screaming and all this
fainting, raising their hands. Amen. Yeah, it's all. I went to the first time I went to the Wild Goose 3 years ago. I joined the beer and hymns thing, and they give us the songbooks. And so I hadn't sung hymns in probably 30 years. And we're singing these hymns, and I'm like, these are atrocious. These are horrible. Washed in the blood. I am a piece of crap. It was just, and again, singing that with such joy and praise and everything for a child is really damaging. It really messes with our psyche and has us living a life of fear instead of one of good productivity, good trouble, helping people, actually doing something. It's just so counterproductive, and
Well,
it's got us where we are now.
In that church I went to, there's a number of things. They wouldn't let the women speak during meetings. They had to raise their hand to speak in the meeting. The guys could just speak openly.
They hate me.
And they would do a number of different things, but one of the worst things I remember my mom telling me, like, the music minister's son, I think it was son, had died a long time ago, and he had killed himself. And in that church, they believe that you're going to hell if you kill yourself. And she's like, so he just kind of had to accept that over time, and whatever. And I'm just like, Now every time when I would look at that guy, that's all I would think about, is like how, like, he thinks his kid is burning in hell forever because they killed himself. That's
I mean, and the trauma that man must feel because his son killed himself. So there's always that guilt, the grief, and then adding basically a fairy tale on top of it is just so destructive. It really is. And it's, like I said, it's counterproductive is the nicest way I can say it. It really, what we should be looking at in death is the unneeded deaths that are caused because of our apathy. We should be looking at the unneeded wars, not because grandpa's 109 and needs to go. We've convoluted so much in our belief system that there is no good news. And again, I'm not saying love is per se good news. I'm saying it's the right thing, because it's really hard. So, if we want to do the right thing, which is the reason why most of us get involved in religion, we want to live a better life. We want to do all of these things. Love is really the only way to do it. And I think that because it isn't easy, is what kind of makes it holy. If there is some type of holiness, because we do have to work at it. We do. I mean, I use in the book, driving, when you get fired or get passed over a promotion or during a breakup, try being loving then. Try saying that love is wimpy then. You will see how difficult it is to really work and be a loving person. And I think that's really all that matters. I'm going to eat my potatoes and my tomatoes and the chocolate and not be a quiet woman, because that's not how I was born. That's not how I am, regardless of what religion says.
There's this thing called Student Life, and I would chaperone it occasionally. It's like a conference, and the big theme of that conference was like heaven or something, I think. And like they were talking about things from Revelations and all this stuff. And one of the little girls on the trip was like crying. And one of the nights I was like, what's that? And they're like, oh, she thought that animals go to heaven, and she's upset that they're not, like that's not part of the vision that they were talking about, and that's not a biblical thing and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, but like when I saw her, like she was so upset. I was like, the Bible says the lion's going to lay down with the lamb. I was like, these people don't know. They haven't actually been to heaven.
Right?
Just so you know.
Right. But having this ego-driven, I talk about the ego so much in the book, and having this ego-driven stance of, I know what's going to happen and I know the real thing, needs to go away in religion. That certainty is what causes the death. That certainty is what caused the Hitler to the name of the Inquisition. All of those things are a certainty about our beliefs. And again, if they're not checked by love, then that's when invasions are justified. That's when cruelty is justified in the name of God. Because it's us doing that as opposed to this God that we have constructed. We just like to blame him for everything or give him credit. That's all he's really there. He's the ultimate scapegoat for us, not because of him. I cover the animals because learning that some people don't believe that animals are in heaven or that animals are even valued on this planet really shook me. So I delved into that too. Is there any reality to that? And found the inception of it. Again, based on our ego, we're supreme, we're the best, God loves us most. When in actuality, we're the ones that destroyed all of God's planet. And I address homosexuality to really get into where and why this is such a thing. And again, it's alterations. I'm good friends with the producers and directors of the 1946 movie, which is touring the US right now. But they talk about the alterations done in 1946. So this homophobic hate is new. It's not even something that's ancient. There are 3 sets of Catholic gay saints. 3 sets. So it's something that's totally new. It's the us against them mentality as opposed to love your neighbor.
And the reason they think it's a sin is like, oh, it goes against God's design or whatever. Like, there's not a single other sin, though, that they would use that standard for. Like, oh, it goes against God's design for us to drink Coke because that didn't exist. Like, we were meant to drink water, like.
Well, according to the Bible, left-handed people are demons. So there is that. There is that. So, I mean, the exclusion and the clique mentality has been around since the dawn of man. We're supposed to rise above it. We're supposed to be better. And I point out how animals are actually more loving than us. We see the ferocity and them, just eating and stuff like that. But we will step over a homeless person or a dying person on the street and complain that they were in our way, when an elephant will stop and spend 3 days with a stranger who has just passed away. So to degrade animals' value on this planet, I think is just more degrading of this thing that we call God, because that's supposed to be his creation, and we just say it sucks. We judge all of that more than anything.
Well, yeah, and the world is wicked and evil, and like God's coming to end it soon, and it's getting so bad, it's getting worse. That's all that I hear when I'm in conservative kind of places. Like, it's getting worse, it's getting bad, the end times are coming because like da 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 da.
Start loving your neighbor. Start caring. I mean, this last goose that I was at, we really had a lot of offside conversations about what exactly love is, right? Because just like God, love comes with so many preconceived notions, trauma, feelings. And what love are we talking about? Are we talking about sexual love? Are we talking about parental love? What are we talking about? So, and I think that for most of my life, love was destructive. Love was abusive. I got hit as a child because I was loved. God loved me so much he was going to send me to hell if I didn't do things. So that love word can be very destructive and really be subjected to the person's definition. So what we did is we tried to come up with something that would include everything, that would still just be like a synonym for love. And the best thing that we came up with was empathy, because empathy is non-sexual, non-gender, and really universal. So when I'm talking about love, I'm not talking about being a patsy. I'm not talking about letting people hurt you, which someone on X found out today. I am not talking about letting things, letting people be abused and all of these. To truly have empathy is to care about that other person And if you care about that other person, you're honoring who they are, not who you want them to be, who they are. So whether that be a person on the rainbow spectrum or someone of a different belief, as long as you are having love or empathy, caring about your neighbor, that's where I feel that is where we're supposed to go.
Yeah. So in your book, you talked about your mother when she was getting close to dying, and she was talking to people in the chair next to her,
Yeah.
like right before that was the last time she was like conscious.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because she was very fundamental from what the book from the book, but like, so she wouldn't be somebody that earlier on would have been like, oh yeah, the spirits come back and talk to you before you go on. And yet she's comforted in that moment by something that's completely contradictory to what she had believed her whole life.
Totally. Yeah. I never thought of it that way. That's totally true. I mean, she thought they were there. I even say in the book, she looked at me like, what are you talking about, when I asked who was there? And I didn't even know what I thought. She was hallucinating, dreaming. I didn't, it was really the first time that I had watched someone go through the death process, until my girlfriend sent me Betty Eadie's book, Embracing the Light. And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what happened to my mom. And then I met a bunch of hospice people, and they said, oh my God, it happens all the time, almost always. A friend of mine's mother just died, and he got the call when we were together. And I said, ask her, because he was on the phone with her, and he asked her if she's seen anybody. And she said no. And I said, well, that's not time yet. And she ended up dying 10 days later. So, and there was a whole bunch of stuff that needed to happen, and healing and forgiveness and all of that stuff. But as soon as all that was done, then she did pass. So, yeah, I mean, because like, anyone who deals with death knows that this happens. Again, any type of religion to shun that is anti-process, if not God. Yeah. Oh my God. I never even thought about how she would have viewed that. Yeah. She would have been like, what?
I worked briefly in a home for people with dementia, and when they were dying, it was kind of weird. Different old people in the house would be like, they would start mentioning the children, and we're like, what? It's talking about children being there. And almost anytime when they would mention that, then when one of them would die.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of,
yeah. Also, I it's so normal per se that any belief against it, again, is just denial.
Yeah, I mentioned it in another podcast. I won't go too much into it, but my grandmother, when I was like 8 years old, she died, and I was like in bed, but I wasn't asleep, and I saw her come into the room like a bright blue light.
Oh wow.
And she said stuff to me, like just basic stuff like, love you, da da da. Mm-hmm. And then she left, and the after she left, the light went away. And I Googled it later on, though, like just recently, actually. Her mouth wasn't moving, and that's something that I always remembered. And that's apparently something that's common in experiences like that. The person's mouth doesn't move when you see that kind of a vision.
Interesting. I have my show. I do it every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's called Fireside Creators. And I have had someone on about a month ago whose dead grandmother has been dead for 20, 30 years, talks to them through the Roku, the TV, the Roku thing. And I've got some paranormal specialists coming in on October to talk about all of this type of stuff.
That's interesting. And you also had an experience like with your mother kind of reaching out to you after she had died too.
And that was probably one of the hardest parts of the audiobook, was reading that aloud. It was tough. I kept having to stop it because I couldn't stop crying. It's one of those things that is so beautiful and so real and that was one of the things I kept telling her before she died. Please, write in the sand, do something. And what happened was against physics and against nature and all of that, but it still happened. And it was absolutely beautiful.
And you talk about so many things that people are actually like really uncomfortable to talk about, like in the book. You're not shy about touching on them. You talk about the obsession that people have with your bodies when really they're just shells. But
Yeah.
like my mother insists that like people, she has to see them and then an open casket in the funeral, which I hate. I want to be cremated, but I'm like, well, if I go first, then there's no chance that that's happening. It's like she'll make sure. But I always hate the idea of like people messing with your body after you die. I'm like, just shove me in the thing and be done with it.
There you go.
But
Yeah,
you talk about
we're meat sacks. We're energy with meat sacks.
You talked about your grandfather. He was a member of the Molokan or Molokan Christian sect, and it's a very unusual experience you had where you sat in front of his body for 8 hours. That's crazy.
Yeah, which is the minimum. They go all the way up to 36 hours.
Like that's a common thing. That's like what they do when somebody dies.
Every funeral. You can choose. You can choose whether it be the minimum or the maximum. And yeah, we're talking the caskets in the middle of the room open, and there are people sitting all the way around them. But the Molokans take pictures at their funerals too, which I thought was so weird. Like so many of my generational pictures of great grandparents and stuff, they're like posing near the casket. Again, if death isn't a bad thing, why would you not want to remember that, right? But that mourning period, that going through that, I don't think I ever cried for my grandfather again after that. It really, odd. I will say that it's odd. Odd because I'm an American, but I was all cried out. And I don't know that any other funeral or any other death has afforded me that luxury. And that demanded it, truly demanded it.
Yeah, and you talk about God as energy, and I always envisioned God as energy from the very beginning, like even in my conservative church. And then it was only later on, much later on, when my cousin, I mentioned something about God, and she said like God's a person, and I was like, no, wait, is it? I was like, God's not a person, and she's like, yeah, he is 1 in 3 persons. He's a person, and I'm like, you actually think he's a person?
But I would make him trans, first of all, which is hilarious because they're so anti-trans. But as I say in the book, so my elementary education was only based on creationism. It was through an evangelical church. It was not science in any way, shape, or form. My annual science projects were hatching and raising chickens. That's how scientifically work. So the science chapter was always something that I was really insecure about, but then I got it checked. And I was like, okay, I am on the right path because of the lack of history and education in my Christian schools about it. But in all of our existence, there is energy and there is matter. And the rules of our existence are that all matter decays, meaning dies, and all energy changes form. Now, the energy in that matter dictates what it is, whether that be a desk or a human, an animal or a star or something to that effect. So when I realized that all matter dies, it's literally a rule of our existence and our universe, then there was no way that God could be a person because all matter dies. The only way that there could be a God is if it's energy. If that energy is there, and then I kind of had like, holy crap, then God must be the energy of love, because love creates, love heals, it has all of those things. But in turn, realizing that God is not some human, some being in the sky, it made the aspect of God completely on us. Whether or not we invoke that love, whether or not we use that love, or we just disregard it. one of the questions I had in my mind in embarking in this journey was, why do babies die of cancer? So I realized that death isn't bad, except for the people who are left behind, and that we are supposed to be there for that child. We are supposed to be there for that family. That is how we can make change and make things better. Not praying, not asking somebody to come in and help, us actually doing so when tapping into that energy of love. So it's with us all the time. We don't need to go anywhere to get it. We just need to embody it and use it and activate it and use it to restore us, and be the people that all of the religious founders wanted us to be, more loving.
Yeah, you get into a lot of the science of things like, I saw this documentary a long time ago. It was called "What the Bleep Do We Know?"
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
I love it.
Oh
I
my
watch
god!
documentaries all the
It's
time.
like you're one of the very few people I've ever known to actually seen it.
Love documentaries.
But you talked a little bit about how like what you see is affected by like your education, your influences, the choices you make, your perceptions about science and God and all these things.
Yeah.
And in that movie, way back then, it talked about how like the Indians, they didn't see Columbus's ship coming, like when it was coming towards them, or the ships, because they didn't know those existed like they were. And it took one of the chiefs or whatever seeing the waves in the ocean and then being like, what is this, and like staring and looking for days before they realized, before he saw it, and then he could convince them that they were coming. Like, and there was another one with Dr. Emoto, and he did a study on water where like, and if he would say, he would get the same type of water and he would speak words over it, like
So
love, hey, like, and just repeat it and go over it.
yeah.
And then they froze it and they would look at they would look at the water, and the chemical layout of it was different. Like it looked different. Like the more hateful, nasty ones were like scattered and kind of, and then the ones that were nice were like shaped really beautifully. And so, and they bring up the point that like, the earth is, I can't remember, on however much water, 50%, but they're like, the human body is like 75% water. So they're like, if words and feelings and things like that, if what we say out to the water like affects it, then what does it do to us? Yeah.
All energy. Yeah, I mean, they do that in schools now where they put two plants and have people curse and talk really bad about one plant and then love the other one. And the one that is loved, a plant grows and flourishes, and the one that is receiving all of that negative energy dies. And so when we're looking at us being energy, full of water, full of all of these vibrations, then we can understand, okay, that energy of God we can either tap into or not. And then the problem is that puts the onus on you. So you are literally responsible for your actions, for your words, for everything, not some guy in the sky that's going to condemn you, not some nanny or hall monitor. Your actions and what you've done to make this planet a better place.
Yeah. And you talk about the influence of drugs on the mind. I had an influencer named Jabezvill, and he had an experience on shrooms, and then from then on, like, he's been completely different. like it affected the whole way that he thinks. Like he used to be like immature and wild, and now he's like more focused on like God things and stuff, because like that impacted him so much, that experience.
Well, and psilocybin, which is the shrooms that you're talking about, are being studied all over the world right now for treating PTSD, as well as alleviating any stress or fright before death. A lot of people who are pending death, where death is imminent, have done the studies and are no longer afraid. They're like, oh no, God's going to take care of me. We're going to be fine. So I say in the book, to use the natural to reach the supernatural is why we have religion. This was done throughout our times, and why we have these remarkable stories about burning bushes and lights coming from the sky and all of those things. It was drugs or schizophrenia, but we have, we to use those types of things to reach God can be really powerful.
Yeah, and you said that our brains are like iPods, and like they're programmed or whatever, and so they're hold on, sorry.
I brought in a quote where a journalist was saying that we are either contained or connected. So some people think this is all we have. Other people think of the brain as an antenna where we can reach out and correspond and do those types of things. Again, it boils down to a black and white thinking in a lot of cases, but I think that you would be able to see the wonder of it all, realizing the scientific basis behind all of this. And there's no fear that way either.
And everybody's brains being programmed differently. Can't explain why for one person they can read the Bible or experience God, and they can go one complete different direction than the other. Like you can be a fundamentalist Christian, super conservative, or you can be more like Jesus.
Yeah, I think your religious attitudes, belief, and actions really show what kind of person you are. If you need fear to be a good person, there's something wrong.
Yeah, I saw the other day somebody on Facebook, they were saying, well, Jesus hung out with sinners, yes, but he did that to change them. And I'm like, did he though? Because
I love them.
I've always had the idea of I think Jesus probably just hung out with them because they were more fun, and he actually enjoyed being around them. That's just too crazy for a fundamentalist, though.
Right? The Pharisees were jerks. Yeah, the love is the whole point with Jesus, right? With Buddha, it's detachment. With Jesus, it's love. With Mohammed, it is individual ownership. But when religion gets involved, and again, agendas take hold. We want more money, we want more people, we want to be better, we want to feed our ego. It's just it's counterintuitive to exactly what the founders of each of the religion tried to change. And if Jesus was in truth trying to change the people that he was with, then he would have been on the Pharisee side, not the side of hanging out with them. The Pharisees called him a drunk. The Pharisees said, you're crazy. Even your family thinks you're crazy. The love is what made him crazy, not the power, not the control, all of that. So if that person was right, he would have been a Pharisee.
And I think fundamentalism gets rid of a little bit of gratitude and stuff too. I don't I did something for somebody a while back, and I thought I'm gonna wait and see. It's a very religious person. They needed to borrow some money, and it's a decent job, and I did. And I'm like, I'm gonna wait and see if they say thank you or if they say praise God. See which one. And and they were like, I knew God would come through with this. Never said thank you. I knew God would come through with this. God, God. And I was like, I didn't need the thank you. I didn't need that at all. But I was just like,
yeah, you did that.
But yeah, I know. I was like, I made a little sacrifice here, and it all goes to God, though.
Yeah. I say in the book, we've created a God that lets children die of cancer, but win football games and find parking spots. That is the epitome of an ego saying, well, God loves me more. And even yesterday, I'm part of the Big Sisters and Big Brothers program, and I was with my little sister yesterday, and we were driving around the mall trying to find a parking spot, and I thought, okay, God, give me a parking spot. So even still, it's that indoctrination. One just happened to open up right next to me right after I thought that. But again, God should not receive the the
credit or the blame.
Thank you. The credit or the blame.
I did
a lot of it.
The same thing the other night when I'm driving in a storm, or it was about to be a storm. I'm like, God, just please make it not storm until I get to work.
See, now that's the crux, though, right? Because if God is truly the energy of love, like I now believe that it is, wouldn't driving through a storm be a perfect time to call on that love for protection? So, needing a parking spot, not really loving, not really, winning a football game. Our football game, our sports have become our politics. That's not loving. Um, I met this man at the Wild Goose, and he told me that 2 years ago he had a gun to his head, and he audibly heard, "Please don't do this." And he asked me what I thought of that, and I said, that is all of your ancestors pushing all of their love to you. That is the energy of love. It doesn't have to be some guy in the sky. It doesn't have to be a being. We just have to invoke the love.
One last real question. So your book is kind of essentially how we've taken the scriptures and we've perverted them, and like we've twisted them, turned them, made them everything but what they actually are.
Yeah.
While we were talking, you mentioned, you're like, I don't know if I would call myself a Christian anymore. Like, I've kind of given that word over to the right in my mind, because they've poisoned the well and they've altered its meaning to where there's all kinds of connotations with that, and that I don't want to be associated with.
Yeah.
And like, what do you have a label like that or what do you do with
The
it?
label that I have come up with is that love is my religion. I have wristbands. In fact, if you go to my website, I'll send you one that says love is my religion and peace is my intention. And this, with road rage, helps me. I can click it and go, that's right, I'm supposed to be loving. That's right, don't do that. So yeah, I mean, someone on another podcast said, so wait a minute, no religion with no dogma or doctrine? And I said, yeah. I mean, religion is supposed to be your goal in order to be a better person and to grow in the spirit of love. So if I'm going to be a part of any religion, it's going to be solely focused on love. And again, I'm not perfect. I screw up daily, if not hourly sometimes, but that is the goal. It is the goal to say, okay, how can I be a better person? And better is even a bad word. A more loving person is the way I like to say it.
People used to say like, oh, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And that would annoy so many people. But really, I feel like for you and me also, like, I feel like that actually fits.
Well, my mom always used to say that religion was law. And so it's really ironic that Christianity would become a religion when Jesus admonished the law. So, I think the difference between spirituality and religion would be focusing more on love as opposed to law, which ironically is what Jesus tried to do.
Yeah. I'm cool with giving them the word Christian, because Jesus wasn't a Christian.
Right.
But
I like to say it in kind of a slutty way because it's funny to me, but I say that Jesus is still my main guy, but I get around. My degree's in comparative religion. So I went through all of them to see. In fact, I say in the book, if you did a Venn diagram of them all, they would all intersect at love and let go. Evangelicals say it as, let go. But it's more like surrender as opposed to an openness. And I think that openness is what needed. Thy will be done, O Lord, is the way that it's phrased in the Bible. Go with the flow is what the hippies say. All of those things. It's said in different languages, in different myths and religions, but those two are the only things that matter.
Yeah, but I'm not ready to give them God or the scripture.
No. I'm trying to take that back, actually.
Yeah, I'm not ready to give them God. I'll give them the title Christian. I'll let them have that.
Yeah, their fallacies, their hypocrisy, let them have all that. But the God that I want to be like is one that is truly loving.
I got your Instagram, Rev Sheri Pallas, and Twitter at Sheri Pallas PhD.
If you spell it right, Google search me, I'm everywhere. You can find me anywhere. In fact, I did want to point out that at the end of the book, there is a QR code.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the launch group that I had, they asked for a follow-up course. So I had a pretty big launch group, and it was kind of unanimous that they're like, okay, you drop all of this stuff on us, now what? So I gathered a bunch of my friends and people who influenced me, and they actually elaborate and expand on what I said in the book, or contradict in some cases, and I'm okay with that too. But if you wanted more, go to the website. It's all there, book club, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I got your website there, sheripallas.com.
The course should launch next month. Don't hold me to it, but I'm hoping to launch it next month.
In your book, We Have Ruined God. It's available pretty much everywhere, right?
Yeah.
I tested that. I was like, let's see if it's on Walmart. Yep, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. It's pretty much everywhere that I looked. So.
Oh my God, when I Googled it and it showed up at Walmart, talk about a happy dance. I'm like, yeah! Yeah, it's, the weird things that authors go through.
Yeah, and definitely do get a hold of that book if you're interested in any of the topics we discussed, because this was just like scratching the surface of what all's in the book. So great book, and thanks for coming on and talking for over an hour.
Thank you so much.